We are starting with slide number 31 from the chapter 20 slides, PowerPoint slides. And we're finishing up with our lecture notes on bacteria. Bacteria come in three basic shapes. They're either spiral shape, rod shape, or round. And the spiral shaped bacteria, we call those spirilla or spirochete. And spirilla is plural and spirillum is singular. And then the rod-shaped, we call them bacilli or bacillus. And the round or spherical, we call cocci or coccus. So this is what they look like. These are electron micrograph images. So this is on the left here, we have a spirillum or spirochete. I'm not sure which one, but those are the two names for the spiral-shaped bacteria. And then we have the rod-shaped. I'm pretty sure this is E. coli. The rod-shaped or oval, these are bacillus. And then we have the round, spherical-shaped bacteria, which we call coccus or cocci. As far as bacterial metabolism, they are divided into different groups based on their oxygen requirements. So I guess what you would call humans, just so you can relate bacteria to humans, for human metabolism, we would be called obligate aerobes, because we must have oxygen to grow. Okay, so if a bacterium is called an obligate aerobe, that means they cannot grow if there's no free oxygen in their environment. They must have oxygen gas. They must be able to consume oxygen in order to live. So those are called obligate aerobes. Now, obligate anaerobes are complete opposite of that. If oxygen is present, they will die. So they are must grow in an environment that is absent of oxygen. Okay? And examples of bacteria like that are the Clostridium botulinum bacterium, which causes botulism, the bacterium that causes gas gangrene, and the one that causes tetanus, which is also Clostridium. It's Clostridium tetani. And you don't have to know these, or I would write them down for you, but these are ones that must have no oxygen. In other words, they cannot grow in the presence of oxygen. Then we have facultative anaerobes. That means they prefer an environment that is free of oxygen, but they can live in the presence of oxygen. So facultative means they can go either way, but because they're facultative anaerobes, they actually prefer an environment that is absent of oxygen. Then, if you look at the other way that we talk about their feeding behavior, as far as how they get their energy, you look at their energy source and you look at their carbon source. So if we say that a bacterium is a photoautotroph, then it's like a plant. It gets its energy from solar energy or sunlight, and it uses that energy to convert carbon dioxide into carbohydrates. So this is like the same thing that as what a plant does. So the photosynthetic bacteria that are photoautotrophs we call them cyanobacteria. There are some that produce, they're photosynthetic except they're anoxygenic. Now these bacteria are, they carry out photosynthesis, but they don't produce oxygen. And a byproduct of photosynthesis is oxygen. That's what we've learned. But there are some bacteria, green sulfur bacteria and some purple bacteria, that carry out photosynthesis in every way like a plant, except they don't produce oxygen. But the cyanobacteria, do carry out photosynthesis and produce oxygen, the same way that a plant does. Then we have chemoautotrophs, and this is different from anything probably that you've learned up until now. That means they get their energy by breaking down inorganic compounds, and then they use that energy to convert carbon dioxide into carbohydrate, an organic compound, some type of carbohydrate more than likely. So these chemoautotrophs, some of them live in deep sea vents 2.5 kilometers below sea level. So this is kind of, for us, it's probably a strange way of getting food and energy. They make their own food, but they don't use sunlight. Obviously, they don't have access to sunlight. So chemoautotrophs get their energy to convert carbon dioxide into food from breaking down inorganic compounds. All right. And then you have heterotrophic bacteria. And these bacteria are similar in as far as the way that they get their energy and their food is similar to humans. Chemoheterotrophs will take in organic nutrients the same way we do, and breaking down those organic nutrients like carbohydrates and proteins and fats, they'll break down those organic nutrients to get their energy. So the example here is given: aerobic saprotrophs decompose most large organic molecules to smaller molecules. Saprotrophs are kind of like decomposers. They're very important in ecosystems. The two types of saprotrophs are bacteria and fungi. Excuse me. And then you have the 3 different types of symbiosis, symbiotic relationships, where mutualism is where both species that live closely together benefit from the relationship. And here they give the example of the bacteria that live in the human intestines, and they actually release vitamin K and B12. So we benefit because we get vitamins from them, and they benefit by getting a habitat and food from us. Commensalism is when one organism benefits and the other is not affected. So there are also bacteria that live in our intestine called obligate anaerobes, because it's an anaerobic environment, no oxygen there. And they live there because the E. coli bacteria that also live there use up the oxygen. And those obligate anaerobes can live in that environment because it is free of oxygen. Then we have, and so they benefit, but we are not affected, in other words, and that's why it's commensalism. Then you have parasitism, and that is when the parasite benefits, the host is harmed in some way. So when they cause disease, we call them pathogens. And many of those disease-causing bacteria form endospores so that they can survive during harsh times, and then they can become active when their environment is better, for their survival. Okay, this is a picture of the nodules on the roots of a legume. A legume, for example, like a soybean plant. So what lives inside of these nodules are bacteria that convert the nitrogen gas in the air into usable nitrogen. Kind of like they provide fertilizer to the plant. They provide fertilizer to the soil. Because plants and living things cannot use the nitrogen in the air, even though our atmosphere is composed of almost 80% nitrogen. We can't use it. We breathe it in, breathe it right back out. We can't do anything with it. And so they convert it to nitrates and nitrites that can be used by the plant and also by animals. All right, these are illustrations of the Clostridium tetanus bacterium that causes tetanus, and they are bacillus shaped or rod shaped, but they form endospores, which enables them to survive very harsh conditions such as even temperatures such as boiling. You have to get rid of Clostridium whenever you can foods. You have to boil to hotter than boiling in order to actually destroy them. So they can survive even boiling temperatures and other harsh conditions by forming endospores. And then they'll become active whenever conditions are more favorable. Now, this is table 20.2. Just like table 20.1 showed us viral diseases, this shows us bacterial diseases. Some of the STDs that are bacterial are syphilis, gonorrhea, chlamydia. Excuse me. Some of the respiratory diseases that are bacterial are strep throat, scarlet fever, tuberculosis, pneumonia, Legionnaire's disease, whooping cough, inhalation anthrax. Some of the skin diseases, boils, carbuncles, acne, all of these are just different forms of acne, really. Leprosy or Hansen disease, impetigo. There's also digestive tract diseases. Peptic ulcers are actually caused, stomach ulcers are actually caused by a bacterium called Helicobacter pylori. So what is going to cure a bacterial disease or a bacterial infection is antibiotics. But if you were to give antibiotics for a viral infection, it would just be like for nothing. You know, there's no benefit in taking antibiotics for a viral disease. But bacterial diseases, we take antibiotics for those. There's a section here that talks about antibiotics, compounds that inhibit protein synthesis. So they can't make the proteins they need to survive, so they end up dying. These are called erythromycin and tetracycline. Compounds that inhibit this biosynthesis of a cell wall, and when bacteria can't form a cell wall, they're not going to survive. That would be penicillin, ampicillin, and fluoroquinolone. I don't know how to say that. Fluoroquinolone, we'll say. Then there's a section here on antibiotic resistance. Staphylococcus aureus is a skin bacterium that can cause skin infections when it gets into your skin, like through an open wound. So it used to be pretty easy to treat with antibiotics, but now, because of antibiotic resistance, 90% of Staphylococcus aureus are actually MRSA, which stands for methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. So what they have to do for those skin infections is treat with stronger antibiotics and more of a cocktail of antibiotics. They have to give you more than one in the hopes that something will help, you know. Now, cyanobacteria, I mentioned earlier, are gram-negative bacteria, but they are photosynthetic. And when they live in close association with fungi, they form lichens that grow on like tree bark, for example. And then we have a section on archaea, which I'm going to cover very, very quickly. Archaea and bacteria seem like they should be in the same domain at least, because they're unicellular and prokaryotic. Their cells don't have a nucleus, but they're so different that they're placed in two separate domains. For one thing, they're different because archaea do not have peptidoglycan in their cell walls, and biochemically, the archaea are more like eukarya than bacteria. What distinguishes archaea is that many archaea live in harsh environments. For example, halophiles live in salty lakes. They actually thrive on high salt concentrations. Where most bacteria would die, we use salt as a preservative so that bacteria won't grow in our canned food. But halophiles are archaea that actually thrive on high salt concentrations. Then we have thermoacidophiles that live, for example, in the hot springs at Yellowstone National Park. They thrive in very hot temperatures and acid conditions. And then we have methanogens that live in the swamp. They are anaerobic bacteria that actually produce methane. So I'm just going to stop there with the notes because I won't ask, most of the questions I ask you are going to be about viruses and bacteria from this chapter. So we're going to stop here with the chapter 20 recordings.